Hello, good afternoon. How are we? Good. We're getting there. We're getting there. I've got a great panel here. We're going to do this with tempo and focus, so you're going to have a great time. But wow, what an amazing 3 days we've had. I mean, I'm feeling inspired. I'm feeling galvanized. I feel like I've learnt so much, and I'm going to go back to my home city tomorrow with a whole set of new ideas, and also a really kind of deep new understanding of the importance of kind of political leadership, I think. Yeah. Now, we're here to talk about the Bilbao Effect. I've certainly felt the Bilbao Effect over the last 2 or 3 days, if that's what that is. But the way I want to frame this discussion is really to pick up what Chris Fair said this morning, which is that, we have city building and we have city making. They are different, but they should also be the same. And to me, what the Bilbao Effect is, and I've watched this since its very, very first inception with great interest, so it's great to actually be here for the first time, 26, 27 years after the Guggenheim opened. What the Bilbao Effect is, city building with an extraordinary ambition, a sort of audacity in terms of the iconic nature of the architecture, but also the extremely clever use of a global cultural brand, but using that for broader transformation of your city as a sort of chess piece, as part of a broader strategy. And I've got 3 fantastic people with me here this afternoon to talk about this from 3 really interesting different perspectives. We have a local politician here, which is Asier. We have Kate Levin, who's a good friend of mine. Kate was Mike Bloomberg's culture commissioner for 12 years. Were you in post for 12 years?
12. Yep.
So yeah, I think you once told me you were a cultural politician for 12 years. Yeah, which is one way of talking about it. And then we've got Jason Schupbach. And Jason, you've I think we mentioned earlier, you're bringing out a book.
I am, yeah.
Perfect chance to plug it.
Well, let's do a plug. How does that sound?
Yeah. Tell us about, so I mean, Jason's an interesting person because Jason's what I would call a kind of a city maker. He's like a cultural city maker. He's devoted his career to that. But what's interesting about his presence on the panel, I think, is he's just edited this book that has this kind of very interesting global perspective, and I hope he'll bring some of that into the discussion. But just do a quick plug so we all know what we're talking about.
Sure. On December 17th, you may purchase. I'm going to do the full plug. Okay, let's keep it interesting. It's called the Routledge Handbook of Urban Cultural Planning, and it is a survey across 6 continents, 44 authors from across the world, many of which have been on this stage. And we're really thrilled to bring it out. It's sort of the first survey in 10 years of urban cultural planning policy.
Right. So. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go with Asier first, right, which is appropriate since he's the host. Asier, cast your mind back, 1997. You're a 17-year-old youth. A 17-year-old Basque youth, yeah?
Yeah.
And this thing opens, This extraordinary thing opens. Can you remember what you thought about it as a local young citizen?
I didn't, at that moment I was not realizing the impact that this museum was going to have. I still remember when the building was starting to be raised, that was a mess of curves.
It was a mess of curves.
Yeah,
I like it.
A mess of curves, and it was black because it was covered with this isolation from the water, so it was not as lovely as the titanium skin that we have actually.
Right.
So it was quite ugly and a little bit like, what's that? It doesn't look like a building, that thing that they are building here. But I have a more fresh. Something that the mayor at that time told, he was Ortuondo mayor, he was saying, okay, apart from the museum, we're going to clean up the river, and we will have color fish in the river. And I was thinking, color fish in our river was nearly solid, not liquid, because of all the rubbish and the pollution that we had. And I was thinking, okay, but probably it would be plastic fish. Actually, the river is clean, and it's wonderful to walk next to the river. And even when we inaugurated the museum, I still remember that I brought my friends from Navarra to show our new museum, and the river still was stinky.
Right.
And when the tide was low, it was even worse. Right. So we're saying, okay, the building is nice, but I don't know if we are going to stay here much.
So look, that's a fantastic little personal anecdote. And within that anecdote, we have a much deeper, wider meaning. And I want to kind of explore that with you, Asier, now, and get Kate and Jason to respond. And it's really to ask you the question, I mean, how did you and how do you continue to pull off this balancing act between having this kind of major cultural institution as a kind of a centerpiece and a tourism attractor, and as a kind of brand, if you like, a brand message, whilst also achieving those many, many other aspects of transformation? What's the sort of secret in Bilbao? How have you, give us, we're all going to go away tomorrow, give us like some really clear tips about how you've done it.
I used to say that the Guggenheim Museum is the cherry on the cake. It's not the cake itself. Right. It's the most beautiful, shiny cherry we could imagine, but it's not the cake. And most of the cities that try to copy the Bilbao Effect, they are only watching at the cherry and not at the cake. Right. And it's much more important than the rest. I mean, to have that public-public cooperation.
It's not anything you said. No.
To have the public-private partnership also, to have the people involved in this transformation, that I think is the most difficult point. In many neighborhoods, for example, after we started with this transformation process, they were asking us, okay, now that you have transformed this area of the city, that we accept that is the central area of the city, and so probably is the first one, now is my chance. Now you must do something similar to this in my neighborhood. So we started also with processes in all the districts, in all the neighborhoods, to do smaller interventions and smaller transformation processes. But doing that, all the city got transformed and all the people got involved in the transformation, because we were not focusing only on the high street. We were focusing in all the districts and involving the transformation to all the corners of the city. And that way, we started a process, and people got used to this process of transformation. And so they were asking for more. Okay, you have finished this, and once you have finished, what's next? Which is the following project? And we have been doing this for more than 30 years, and now we are planning the transformation for the next 25 years, and we will go on in this way. And culture, at that time, probably we were not aware of the importance that the culture had for the city, but it was seen that it could be a new economical motor for the city. Because in the past we were an industrial city. We had chimneys and factories in the middle of the neighborhoods. We didn't have any green area. We were a very dark, polluted city in black and white because it was covered with the ashes of the chimneys, all the buildings. And we loved it. I mean, right. We still have a little bit of nostalgia about that smell of ferric oxide in the atmosphere. It was part of our identity. So
like it.
Now it's smarter, it's cleaner, but still we remember with a little bit of love that stinky, polluted city that we used to have.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Nostalgia, yeah, great. So what I'm hearing there is, that what we're talking about here is not just leadership and, messaging that's kind of filtering all the way through society, but I'm also hearing that you have a kind of a grand strategy within which this kind of cultural icon sits, cleaning up the river, many other projects, many projects. But what was the trick with communicating with the citizens, though? What was the trick to get them to, because one of the things that Senor Vidati said yesterday in his talk, or the day before in his talk, is he said that it's not just about the sort of material benefits that it's brought, it's a sort of attitudinal change. Just tell us a little bit about that, about how you kind of took the citizens on that journey.
Well, I think the most important point at that time was that we were in a very deep crisis with a huge rate of unemployment. So the main focus was where are the jobs of the future? And so by investing in these new facilities and in this new economy connected with professional meetings, with attracting cultural events to the city, we were trying to promote and to attract new jobs, new economical activities to the city. And as people were seeing that was real, after not before the Guggenheim, but after the Guggenheim, that when they saw that really we were creating jobs around, that the money was coming to the city, then the view of the people about the project changed completely.
Right.
Because previously, people didn't believe that this was going to work.
Right.
They were saying, okay, this is something that these mad politicians have thought about, and they are spending a huge amount of money in nonsense when we need factories, and they are building a museum.
Right.
But once we build it and we recuperated the money invested through the tax income in just 3-4 years, and around the museum we created as much jobs as the ones that were previously in the shipyard that was in this same place where actually is the Congress Palace. The view of the people about the project changed completely, and they really believed, okay, probably it's not a good idea. It's not a bad idea, I mean, to invest in these new facilities, in this new economy for the city, in transforming the city from the industrial city to the service-providing city. And so they got involved, and they got on the ship, and they went ahead with us. And also happened the same thing with I must say, with the rest of the political parties that were against this strategy at the beginning. Once they saw, okay, probably we were wrong, and this is not so much a bad idea, so they also changed their mind, and they got involved also in the project.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask you one question, so I want to move on to sort of Kate and Jason. And it's a slightly cheeky question, right? Which is that, what do you think would have happened if it hadn't have been financially successful so quickly the way you describe? If it had been seen as a sort of a slightly dodgy investment that hadn't brought the return, what would have happened there? Because you were taking a big political risk, weren't you?
I think that if it would have the success in the main goal of creating jobs, the idea wouldn't change.
Okay.
Because I don't think that people were expecting either that the museum was economically profitable. The main goal and the main objective was to create jobs.
Right.
And so as far as we were able to create jobs, I think people wouldn't question the project. The metro system, for example, the metro system will not recuperate the invested money anytime, because as any other public transport, it has no benefit.
Right.
So it's impossible to recuperate the hundreds of millions of euros invested in the metro system. Nevertheless, it was needed also, the metro system, for this transformation process that we have done. And no one questioned well, there were some, but not many, questioning the metro system. Our previous mayor used to say that, a phrase that I think is lovely, all good projects have people against. And if there is no one against, probably it's not so good project, and you should think about it a little bit more.
That sounds like that's a real politician's thing to say, but that's good. All right, Kate. Now you were Cultural Commissioner for 12 years. I mean, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but the dial shifted in terms of cultural investment in New York City. It really did, and I think underneath your kind of custodianship, there was a huge amount of investment, and I guess the cultural infrastructure of the city changed, particularly outside Manhattan. It was revolutionary in some places. Just reflect on, for us, on Asier's comments about putting everything in this broader context, about placing cultural strategies within larger strategies, because I think that was very much your approach, wasn't it?
And very much the conversation about all the other impacts that culture can have, that success looks like a lot of different things, because I think to me, one of the most striking successes of the Bilbao project is the way that it has been spectacular both literally and transactionally, and that transactional piece about planning and communication and building public will towards something else really works against two of the most debilitating myths that the cultural sector has to deal with. One is that artists are lone geniuses, when in fact they are community builders, and creativity functions via the best kind of contagion. And the second thing is that the idea of any kind of cultural success is a one-off, when in fact cultural projects take a huge amount of planning and buy-in, And there is millennia of track record around culture having the kind of success that you're describing. It may not, perfectly strike the bottom line, but everything else tends to come along with it. So, one of the things I've taken to saying is that culture is unpredictable, but it's dependable. People tend to receive it in this transformational way that makes it feel unique, and the individual forms of cultural expression may be. But I think certainly what we were trying to do in New York is work with really organic communities who wanted to express and develop through forms of creativity, and you have to meet it in all different levels. The Guggenheim here was a spectacular institution, but you've talked about the other things that you have in the city that are part of your cultural network and ways that you serve your citizens. And I think that's the reflection and the ongoing benefit of what happened here. There's a former mayor of Winnipeg, Glenn Murray, who talked about irritable Bilbao syndrome. I'm not sure how that translates, but what he was pointing out is, the pressure to just buy culture. It doesn't get trucked in.
Yeah.
It flourishes, when it is part of this incredibly deep and respectful conversation.
Yeah. And just quickly, in terms of like the role of leadership, I mean, obviously you were a leader, you're in a position of leadership. What were the key leadership levers you had to pull in your time there? You obviously, you were pretty close to the mayor himself.
I had an amazing boss. I have an amazing boss. I think particularly in the area of culture, because it doesn't quantify and it doesn't enumerate like other city services. And what I was saying before, if you're paving the streets or picking up garbage, people expect a level of standardization of service. And again, culture doesn't deliver that way. So it's a combination of listening to potential and figuring out how to translate from creative aspiration to the public process. Because if you're spending tax levy money on something, and in the case of New York and certainly the United States, it's always a public-private partnership. Right. But if there are public monies involved, you have to have an output that people can recognize. They don't have to like it. It's not the question of taste. Yeah. But you have to see these benefits of social cohesion, and people have to be able to appreciate that. So it's the combination: listening, translation, communication, and for all of us who have been bureaucrats, understanding how the money comes and where it goes.
Yeah. Okay. Jason, I can see you're just really keen to get into the conversation. Sorry to leave you so long. Just reflect on this yourself, because you spent probably 20 years of your career working really at sort of grassroots level with communities on sort of place-based stuff, making as opposed to building. What have you learned from your few days in Bilbao? Just reflect a little bit on Asier's comments about the overall strategy.
Sure. I think when you look at urban cultural planning and policy, it's highly othered a lot. It's sort of seen as this, it's like this special thing. And I think what we've seen in the last 20 years is a lot of sophistication and normalization of how those policies and processes work in cities. And so, there's anybody who knows anything about city building knows there is no silver bullet. You need silver buckshot. I used to live in the West, so I hope it's okay to use like a rifling metaphor.
Somebody earlier said the Guggenheim's like the biggest single silver bullet that's ever landed.
Yeah. And so, if you need 100, I'm just guessing, if you need 100 strategies, you need to be thinking about it once to do good development in cities, or to make just things happen for its citizens. 10 to 12 of those are highly developed and understood cultural strategies. And I think Bilbao did one version of it. It did a hardware strategy. I think there's a lot of software strategies. And I always come back to, if you're trying to have solve solve problems in cities, and have creative solutions, you need creative people, right? Why are you not putting artists at the table, a creative person? What can artists do? They know how to fail. They know how to create friction. We've all been in an art piece where we felt a little friction. They know how to generate joy. They know how to bring people together to build trust. I'm trying to pull on all the things we talked about in the last couple of days about what makes city making happen. And creative people know how to do that already. They're trained in it. They've researched it. And so I think a lot of the software side of the puzzle, and you saw it sort of bits and pieces of it talked about here. We had a music festival at night and it brought people together. We did this. We did this. Those are actual real strategies. They're serious. And artists are real jobs. In the United States, the GDP of the creative industries is $1.1 trillion. It is bigger than construction, and it is bigger than manufacturing. It's serious business. And so I just, my encourage to all of you who are watching and that everyone that's here is to take these serious as strategies. And you don't have to build a Guggenheim to do it. When I was at the National Endowment for the Arts, we funded a town of 12 people. Last Chance, Colorado. It wasn't their last chance. It was our joke, to work with designers to do a whole project about the culture of the place. And it was about a rhubarb pie. The culture of the place was a food that had been made there for like the last 100 years. And so, these things are meaningful to people themselves. It's a way to get people deeply engaged in the future and the story of their place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I just want to pursue this idea of the fact that arts and culture are sort of othered within the kind of system, within the policy-making system.
Yes, the magical artist, as Kate referred to.
Kate basically was saying that it's actually a remarkably reliable strategy, the culture strategy, over history. Yeah?
Yeah.
But why is it, therefore, there is this kind of slight suspicion? Why is it there is this kind of you call othering, which means people don't feel like they're totally comfortable with it as a sort of mainstream item. But what's the cause of that?
Kate probably has a lot to say about this too. I think that may be a Western society thing. If there are many indigenous communities that don't even have a word for art, but in a lot of Western societies, art has taken on a meaning of like the high arts, right? And I even hate that word high, of symphonies and operas, and that's not for the common person. And so when people would say, "Oh, that's not for me," I'd say, "Well, do you sing in your church or temple? Do you dance? Are you a DJ? That's your own personal cultural practice. That is art." And so, I think the othering is that when people see cities invest in like a Bilbao, they stumble immediately to that's the only way to do this because it's this high art thing that gets national attention. And I had to just tell a funny story. When the project happened, I was also like 17 or 18, and I was so impressed that I actually wrote to Frank Gehry and asked him to design a tattoo for me. And thank God he never responded. Oh my God. Never heard back from his office. But that's the kind of, I was a little redneck in North Carolina. That's the kind of international impact of story change that happened for your cities for doing one of these cultural strategies,
That's an amazing story, because how old were you?
50-ish. How dare you ask a lady that?
All right, so it's really great. We've got two stories about these two guys when they were younger. All right, okay. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got to be strict with ourselves. So let's just think about the future now. Let's kind of shift the lens forward. We started off the discussions at this event. Talking about the poly crisis, and it was all terribly scary and really big stuff. And I just wanted to sort of us to think. We don't need to go into too much detail because we've had too much information. But I was wanting to ask you, Asier, if you were going to. It's a very different context now. We're in a different kind of crisis. You were in a crisis then. There's a new crisis now. If you were going to be doing it all over again, and you were looking. I know that you are. It's a continuous process. But if you were trying to do it now, what would you do differently?
Well, I think that we tried, first of all, to transform the city, but also to make the projects viable, to make them possible. And so they must be affordable in terms of budget. Right. And so in many cases, the only solution to make them viable was to increase the density in some places. I think that in some places probably would be a better project with less density in those spaces. Now, in the new developments, I think we have balanced quite well the density of the places that we are redeveloping. But in the past, in some places, there was no option to reduce that density, and I think it's a pity. But the other point that probably would find to have changed, and still is not solved, and is that here, there is no possibility of including any regulation about the design of the new buildings, if it's a private, the one that is designing the building. And so we are making a big effort in the public buildings, in the public facilities, to introduce high-quality design in those buildings that we are designing, because they are for the long term, they are for the future of the city, they are the image of the city, so we must take care of this design. But many cases when the private is promoting a building, First of all, the numbers must fix, and then if the image of the building also fixes, perfect. But if not, it's better to fix the numbers. Okay. And that's a pity for the city, because you lose opportunities to build beautiful buildings. Yeah. And for me, an obsession is that social housing can be also beautiful building. Yeah. And we must make a big effort on that. In that point, I'm very happy with the project that we are developing with Basque government in the island of Zorrozaurre. That is going to be social and rental housing project with wood in the structure of the building, linked with the previous speech that we heard, with a beautiful design. And we have the project has been chosen after and in a wide competition of design of the buildings. And I think that's the path, that's the way. I mean, we must do proper, good, beautiful buildings in the city. And the pity is that we cannot, regulate a little bit more that issue.
I'm surprised to hear that, given what I've seen of the city so far. But that's a subject.
We're ambitious.
That's the subject of a different panel on another day. Okay. Looking to the future, city building, city making, cultural strategies, what are the big priorities for us as we think about integrating culture into our plans for a more sustainable future?
I think a couple of things, and one of them that is perhaps the most urgent is understanding that culture manifests in so many ways. The Guggenheim is one version of it, but amateur activities are really essential. So opportunities in the public realm, opportunities in schools to cultivate that sort of individual sense of creative expression, really important. Urban planning that allows for different kinds of festivals, the things that get you out of your house and again, create a sense of society. But again, understanding the multivalent ways that culture manifests and the kind of policies that say yes to projects and not no. And I think that's pretty important. I would add friendly amendment. I think a lot of the time culture gets othered because its very strengths, which are that it is so collaborative from municipal terms, means that it requires a lot of input from different city agencies. And that is often the biggest benefit of, certainly some of the public art projects I've been involved in, is it gets folks talking to each other and it builds municipal muscle that then go on to be beneficial for other projects. But I think that the second thing is to understand the value and differentiation of culture in terms of time. And that's to say, some projects are early wins. Some projects take much, much longer to manifest and for people to appreciate their value. And finally, that culture is never done. Its strength is how responsive it is. So for one thing, making sure you're making space for actual artists, whether they're amateur or professional, literally making spaces for them, but just also appreciating the fact that you're always going to want to go back and have changed something. So the best cultural projects are ones that are built to develop, expand, and keep being responsive.
Okay, thank you. Jason, in terms of, you've done this kind of, you're publishing this kind of, it's almost like a survey of where we are globally with urban cultural planning. I was very struck by something that someone said earlier today, which is a city the size of Paris is appearing in the world every month, or something like that. And if you read the Adrian Ellis's, every 2 years he publishes an index of cultural buildings. There seems to, it's slowed down a bit over COVID, but we still seem to be building a lot. Yeah. In our future, are we going to be able to do that city building with culture in the same way? What's happening around the world? Is there some sort of change? Are we going to a different kind of model?
I think we're still suffering a little bit from irritable Bilbao syndrome. I don't want to keep saying that on this panel. I mean, the conversation in the States is very interesting right now. It's much more of a software conversation. It's really about building our civic infrastructure. Right. So Chairman Maria Jackson at the NEA just had in January a big meeting, which I encourage you to go watch, called Healing, Bridging, and Thriving. And it was about what is the intersection of cultural practice with some of the biggest issues we're facing in our country? So our loneliness epidemic, right, which in the United States is a serious thing, which is leading to all kinds of lack of trust. And we think we have a trust problem in the United States, just, yes, maybe. So I'm finding that conversation really interesting because it feels like a new policy area where people are really trying to make actual things happen that then build the trust to then do the city building in the right way. And so that's one area where I think there's a lot of attention at the moment, at least in the States. Outside the States, there's such a wide variety of things happening. There's some cities that are very focused on like creative industries development. So there's whole cities of music, cities of design, cities of media, where people are doing just really focusing on the business side of the picture. In a lot of the global South, these policies show up in heritage policies, right? There's not these formalizes, there's not Kates, right? necessarily in a lot of these cities. But there's still people doing on the ground absolutely innovative, interesting, and incredible work, working with creative people trying to impact policy. Yeah. There's a ton of work happening around climate resilience, and I think there's a lot of interest in indigenous practices, cultural practices for dealing with the climate resilient, from giving us climate resilience that we have a lot to learn from. That, I remember when I was out in Arizona, the indigenous tribes that have been living in the desert there have been living there for 30,000 years. They have a lot of lessons, and they're incredibly generous. I don't mean to be othering them by saying they, but they're incredibly generous with those lessons. And they're like, hey, we kind of know how to do this. Would you just listen to us? Yeah. But there's deeply tied cultural practices into being able to do that. So I just feel like for every challenge we face, there is an option for involving cultural practices into it. And so again, it's part of the puzzle in my mind.
Okay. So I'm going to pick up that little sentence you said there about options and sort of try and draw a conclusion from our discussion. And then I'm going to ask you one more thing before we close. Yeah. Which is, I think there's been a lot of stuff written about the Bilbao Effect. There's been a lot of skepticism. But I think the point about what's happened in Bilbao isn't really, in the end, about the iconic building and the brand. I think it's actually about the broader strategy and vision of the city. And what we've learned from this discussion is that that's kind of what really matters. And then what you have with culture and arts and creativity is you have this enormous, deep human resource that you can draw on. And there are multiple ways you can do that, and that's going to be constantly changing and evolving as we go forward. But before I wrap up totally and say thanks to everybody, when you stood there on Thursday morning and gave your welcoming remarks, you said that you were looking forward to all the learning for yourself from inviting all these amazing people to your city. I don't want to put you on the spot, because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but what's the main thing you've learned from these discussions?
I think that there have been quite a wide view about many different issues connected with city transformation, but I think that I love it about the program, that there were quite a lot of ideas connected with we can say, the software of the city, not about the hardware. So now that we have done most of the hardware transformation, and we have a route, a map about the future hardware transformation, to know a little bit more about the last innovations in software, I think is good for us, because we want also to have it in the city, to have everything bubbling in the city, creativity, innovation, artists and cultural new exhibitions and artists producing here to spread it outside. And so to know how different cities are solving these problems, how they are connecting with the people, I think that it has been one of the most interesting things in these days.
Fantastic, software. So, Asier, I think I can speak on behalf of everybody who's been here over the last few days. You're the representative of the city government, but I know we've also got the Metropoli. I think we should just say thank you to you for the brilliant event you've put on here and for allowing us to experience your city.
Thanks to Bilbao Metropoli 30 and all the people that have been working here. Yeah. And also to World City and all the people that have been behind the scene also.
And thanks to World City as well. So everybody, we should also say thank you to our panelists for joining me here and for their brilliant insights. So Asier, Kate, Jason, round of applause.